Well, as you guys can see, I've got a brand new motorcycle, and it's not a BMW. I'm down here in Anza Borrego State Park in Southern California, and I took a few days off to go to LA and pick up a brand new Husky 701 Enduro. I'm going to ride around this beautiful desert environment and take you guys on an adventure. So for those of you that are curious, I am keeping my BMW 1200. It's a great bike. I've got a lot more adventures to take on that large adventure bike. But the long and short of it is that I wanted something smaller. I wanted something that I could go off and do some harder roads when I'm by myself, when I'm riding solo, and when I fall over and have to pick up the bike, it's not going to weigh a ton, and I'll just have more fun and be able to do some of those more challenging roads that are, a little bit more difficult on a big bike like the 1200. So this is it. It's the Husky 701 Enduro. It's the LR version, which means long range, because it has an extra fuel tank up front. It's got the one in the rear and it's got the one in the front. And that will give me about a 300-mile range, which is awesome. My BMW GS has about a 200-mile range. So with this little bike here, I'll be able to go a lot farther between fill-ups. I decided about a month ago that I was interested in this bike and that might be my next purchase when it comes to a motorcycle. And so I put the word out looking for one of these with the LR, with the long-range fuel tank on it. And a buddy of mine in California called me back a couple days later and said, hey, there's one at the local dealership here. It's almost brand new. The bike is a 2020. It's not brand new, although it only has 2,900 miles on it. And the previous owner had done a lot of upgrades on it, which I'm going to go through and just tell you briefly in a second. So long story short, I got a really good deal on this bike. I got it for less than the cost of a new one. I didn't have to pay freight. I didn't have to pay setup. I didn't have to pay sales tax. And it's already kitted out with a lot of things that I would have done anyways. So let's go through those really quickly. It's got a Seat Concepts seat on it, carbon fiber heat shield for the exhaust. The exhaust has been replaced with a Wings exhaust. It's got a Husky tail bag on it. Both of the gas caps have been replaced. Crash bars have been added. It has a USB socket installed onto the dash. The mirrors have been replaced with adjustable mirrors with a ram mount, which I really love. The front headlight has been replaced with an LED headlight. I'm not sure about the back end, but I was told that the rear fender and or the rear light has been replaced. It looks like it's an LED light, so that might have been replaced as well. A lot of upgrades to this bike. It would have been probably a couple $1,000s at least to do those myself. So I saved that money plus the other expenses that I mentioned before, and all of that for less than the cost of a new one. So I am really stoked to be riding this bike. And it's kind of funny to say, but I've been riding adventure motorcycles for almost 25 years now, and during the course of my riding I've had 3 brand new BMW motorcycles. So this is a first for me. It's my first non-BMW bike, and I'm really stoked. It's a 701. It's a little smaller, a little bit lighter, but yet from what I understand and what I will soon find out, I really think that it has a lot of off-road credentials. Looking forward to it. The sun is going down right now, so I don't think I'm going to get my first ride in tonight. I'm going to set up the van here, do a little overnight van camp, and then hit some of these trails in the morning. Well, it's a beautiful morning out here in Fish Creek Canyon, and I'm going to go for a short ride today. Just going to bring the GoPro with me, and I've got a copy of California Desert Byway, and it has a number of routes to do down here in Anza Borrego. So I'm going to be using this book over the next few days to explore this area. My initial impressions, it sounds awesome. It's different than what I'm used to. You know, my BMW's a little more quiet, a little more sedate, but with this Wings exhaust on here, it's really got a throaty sound. And you know, with that single cylinder thumper in that exhaust, it's just like you feel like you're on a dirt bike, and it sounds like one. It's totally different than riding my 1200 GS. Feels so much lighter, more agile. Got 21-inch front tire on here. Makes a world of difference going over the rocks and through the sand. Just the overall lightness of it made me feel a lot more ease going on this kind of terrain. It would have been a little bit more of a handful on my 1200. The suspension is definitely a lot stiffer, and so I feel like it's not as smooth, and I notice the bumps a little more. I think it's harder, but that would obviously be good when you're going over really rough terrain and you need that suspension. So for me, just on my initial impression, I just had to remind myself to just keep it loose and just let those bumps sort of pass under me rather than holding really tight to the bike and getting vibrated. My goodness, what can I say? It's just a very quick, short ride. I'm gonna make some breakfast now, pack up the bike, head back into town, and continue exploring this area.
Slow down, mama, why you talk so mean? Good Lord, Nashville, it ain't what it seems. You got nice clothes, late night shows, boogie down at the bar, fiddle tunes and homemade booze, but it always goes too far. Shooting pool, crack a jack, you can take off now and don't look back, but hey, don't you wanna play? Hold on, sugar, why you look so sad? Come on now, mama, ain't nothing here so bad. You got fast cars, movie stars, party on down the street with Mary Jane, good cocaine, lay it down there. Double down, throw some dice, you can take off now, don't think twice, but hey, don't you wanna play? Baby, go on.
I like Anza Borrego because there's not a lot of people out there, there's not a lot of traffic. What really makes it appealing to me is the desert and mountain environment. You've got a transition zone right there from the low desert up into the higher mountains, and there's just tons of really good off-road riding out there and lots of free dispersed camping. So I plan on camping in the van a couple of nights out in the desert, maybe a night up in the higher elevations where it'll be a little bit cooler, and just riding around and exploring some of these back roads. The first thing I did was I went down the old Culp Valley Road, and that was short. It was only about 5 or 6 miles of off-road, but really beautiful and scenic, going through the rocks, going on the sand, just weaving my way through this desert environment. After that, I went down Grapevine Canyon Road, and that's about a 13-mile dirt road that kind of winds its way through this similar desert mountain environment up here. And again, really beautiful. That dropped me down in elevation out into the desert flats down below, where I rode through Borrego Springs, the little town. And then the high point of the day was going out to this place called Fonts Point. And it's about 20 miles outside of the town of Borrego Springs. And you leave town on the pavement and then you turn into this wash. And that was where I feel like I really got to connect with this bike for the first time, was riding through that wash. It was fun, it was super exhilarating, and it brought me up to this vista, this overlook, this point where I could just look off in the distance and see all of these like badland rock formations. Absolutely spectacular, really beautiful. I did have a little adventure up at the top of that overlook because the wind was blowing so strongly that my bike actually tipped over just while it was on the side stand. It just fell over because of the wind. It's so strong out here. It blew the bike over on its kickstand. Kind of a bummer, but like I said, that's out of the way. So I'm up here at a place called Fonts Point, I believe, and this place is inspiring. I mean, just look around at this landscape. It's like the Badlands up here. It's really cool. I don't really have my setup like I'm normally used to as far as photography and video on the bike. I can't really carry a good tripod or anything like that, so it's mostly been GoPro today, but it'll give you an idea of the kind of roads that I'm going down. And so far with this bike, it's an A+. I absolutely love it. I haven't had any bad experiences or issues. It just really eats up this kind of terrain, and I'm having a really great time. And then I just decided to follow that road, even though it wasn't one of the official routes in this book that I've been using. The road continued and it just kind of dropped down into this narrow gully and this wash, and I just figured I would kind of follow that road and see where it went. It took me a good while to navigate through this maze of desert roads, but it was absolutely beautiful, and I went through everything from like sandy washes to like, there were parts of the road that were completely blown over by sand. I couldn't even tell if someone had driven down it for weeks. It was really, really cool, and so much sand. I can't believe I rode so much sand today. If I was on my 1200 GS, I'd probably still be out there, but not on this little bike here. It got me through just fine. I took it pretty slow because it's a new bike and I'm just kind of feeling things out. If you guys are used to riding small bikes and dirt bikes, you probably think that I'm riding like a wussy, but I'm just going at my own speed, learning it as I go along. It got to a point in the afternoon where I was just flying through that sand. I couldn't believe it. I was having more fun, feeling more confident, and just feeling the agility of the light bike just dancing with that sand and going over those berms and through the washes and the rocks. Absolutely incredible. So much fun. It was getting pretty hot down in the desert, but I wanted to poke around a bit in some of the communities that lie off the beaten track. Here I'm out in Ocotillo Wells, and as you can see, this is a real off-road haven. People come out here to ride their dune buggies and their quads and their ATVs and of course their off-road motorcycles. And this looks like a pretty interesting community. I wouldn't say it's necessarily off-grid, but it's one of those, to me it almost feels like a post-apocalyptic Burning Man kind of community out on the edges of civilization. You've got all these decrepit old trailers. Sometimes you can't tell what's abandoned and what's lived in, but there's definitely people that live out here, and there's definitely some places that are falling apart, and I don't think anybody lives there. But it's interesting to drive through these kind of places nonetheless. And I would say that I don't want to misrepresent this area. Borrego Springs is a nice little charming town. There's actually really beautiful neighborhoods and spas and some things like that, but it's small. You know, it's not LA, it's not super high end, but you've got a mixture. You've got a little bit of obviously some money out here, and then maybe some poverty as well. So an interesting community to explore. And again, the highlight really is all these tracks out in the desert here. So I really put the little Husky through its paces today. It was my first ride. I did about 75 miles. I would say probably 50 miles off-road and maybe 25 miles on the pavement. And it was really good on the pavement too. Oh my God, it's so much fun. It's definitely a smaller engine, but it goes, and I love the sound of the muffler. It has a grunt and it sounds really cool. It's really fun to ride. It's just a different experience. So this bike so far is exactly what I wanted it to be. It's fun, it's light, it's fast, and it's just a completely different experience. I'm super stoked. I'm really happy to have this bike. I think there's going to be lots of adventures going forward with this bike, and this is just the start. Well, I hope you liked this first ride on the new Husky 701. I sure did. It was a lot of fun. The bike is just what I hoped it would be. You know, I still have a little bit of a learning curve ahead of me. There's some systems to learn on the bike, although it is pretty simple, I gotta admit, and that's one of the reasons I got it, is I like the simplicity of it. There's just not a lot of electronics on this bike. It has traction control and it has 2 ride modes, and that's about it. But so far so good. I'm really enjoying my new bike, and there's definitely going to be more to come. Thanks for watching this video.